Some journeys are chosen for pleasure, while others find you, pulling you forward no matter how much you resist. Hercule Poirot had not wanted to take this particular train. He had, in fact, been perfectly content in his first-class compartment aboard the main Orient Express line, his small patent leather shoes resting comfortably, his moustaches freshly waxed, a cup of tisane cooling at his elbow. He had been looking forward to 3 uninterrupted days of what he privately considered the highest human achievement: thinking, not investigating, not being called upon to rescue foolish people from the consequences of their own passions, simply thinking. It was his friend and occasional tormentor, the jovial Arthur Hastings, who had suggested this detour. "Poirot, old boy, you've never seen the Hungarian countryside in autumn. It's extraordinary, the colors alone." Hastings had gone on at considerable length about the colors, and Poirot, in a moment of weakness that he would later blame entirely on an overly rich dinner in Vienna, had agreed to board the Danube Arrow at Budapest, a smaller, older branch-line train that wound its way through the lesser-known villages of Hungary before rejoining the main European rail network somewhere near the Austrian border. It was, as the timetables described it, a scenic route. It was, as Poirot would come to know it, something else entirely. The Danube Arrow was not a glamorous train. She had none of the Orient Express's gleaming brass and velvet luxury. Her carriages were old, the kind of old that remembers things, that holds shadows in its corners and creaks when the wind changes, as though sighing at some private memory. The passengers who boarded her were a curious collection, the sort one finds only on trains that exist slightly outside the awareness of the modern world. People who had chosen this route deliberately, or who had been placed here by a fate more deliberate than themselves. Poirot had noticed this, of course. Poirot noticed everything. It was both his gift and, on occasion, his burden. He noticed the tall British lord who moved through the narrow corridor as though the train owed him an apology for its smallness. He noticed the young Frenchwoman beside the lord, beautiful in the way that women are beautiful when they are trying not to be seen. He noticed the quiet Egyptian doctor with the leather satchel he never let leave his hands. He noticed the nun who moved her rosary beads without ever moving her lips. He noticed the Hungarian conductor whose eyes were the eyes of a man who had made a decision he could not take back. He noticed all of these things the way one notices the individual instruments before an orchestra begins to play, separately, curiously, without yet understanding what the music will be. But it was the woman on the platform who changed everything. She was old, or seemed old, in the way that certain people seem ageless rather than aged, as though time had looked at them and simply decided not to bother. She wore the layered skirts and the coin-threaded headscarf of the Romani people, and she stood very still at the edge of the platform at Budapest Keleti station, watching the passengers board with the particular quality of attention that most people reserve for things they have already seen happen. When Poirot passed her, she reached out and took his hand. Not grabbed it, not clutched it. She simply took it, the way one takes hold of something fragile, with both care and certainty. "Monsieur," she said, and her voice was low and steady, accented with the particular music of the Hungarian plains. "On this train, there is a man who wishes to die, but the one who will die, he is the one who wished it." Poirot looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were dark and entirely serious. There was no performance in them, no theatre. Just the flat, quiet delivery of someone relaying a fact they have already come to terms with. "And you, madame," Poirot said carefully, "how is it that you know this?" She released his hand. She did not answer. She simply looked at him with an expression that was almost grief. The whistle blew. The conductor called the final boarding. And Poirot, with his neat little steps and his orderly mind, and his deep and genuine unease, climbed aboard the Danube Arrow. He did not sleep well that night. By 2 o'clock in the morning, he understood why. This is the story of what happened on that train. It is not a comfortable story. It is not a story with easy villains or simple justice. It is a story about the choices people make when they believe no one is watching, and about one small, precise, rather extraordinary Belgian who was watching all along. The platform at dusk. The train had a particular smell. Poirot noticed it the moment he stepped into the narrow corridor of the Danube Arrow. Old wood, coal smoke, and something beneath both of those things, something older. The smell of a place that has absorbed too many human stories and never quite released them. He wrinkled his nose, not unpleasantly. He was, after all, a man who believed that details mattered. All details, including the ones that arrived through the nose rather than the eyes. His compartment was small but adequate. Clean, which pleased him. The seat cushions were worn at the edges but recently brushed, which told him the conductor took some pride in his work, despite working with limited means. There was a small window through which the last of the Budapest evening light fell, in long, amber strips across the floor. Outside, the platform was still busy, porters wrestling with luggage, families pressing their palms against glass to say farewell to someone inside, vendors calling out in Hungarian with the particular urgency of men who had only minutes left to make a sale. Poirot set his small travelling bag above the seat, smoothed his jacket, and sat down. He was not yet thinking about the woman on the platform, not directly, but she was there, somewhere behind his thoughts, the way a sound persists in a room after its source has gone quiet. A man who wishes to die. He pressed his fingertips together and looked out the window. It was then that the other passengers began to settle themselves, and Poirot, with the trained and patient attention of a man who has spent decades reading people the way others read books, began to read. Lord Edmund Ashworth entered the corridor first, or rather, he filled it. He was a large man, not fat but substantial, with the kind of physical confidence that comes not from strength but from a lifetime of never having been told to move out of the way. He was perhaps 55, silver at the temples, jaw set at an angle that suggested permanent mild irritation. He wore his travelling clothes the way soldiers wear uniforms, not for comfort, but as a statement. Behind him, and notably separate from him despite being only 2 steps back, came the woman Poirot had noticed on the platform. Celeste Moreau was her name. Poirot had overheard it at the ticket counter, where Lord Ashworth had spoken it with the particular ownership one applies to possessions rather than people. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired, with the kind of French beauty that does not announce itself but simply exists, quietly and without apology. But it was not her beauty that caught Poirot's attention. It was her hands. She held them clasped in front of her, very still, very controlled, and Poirot, who understood hands perhaps better than faces, saw in that stillness, not calm, but the exhausting effort of maintaining calm. She was afraid of something, or for someone. He was not yet certain which. They passed into the next compartment without acknowledging him. Dr. Karim Nasser arrived shortly after, moving with the unhurried ease of a man accustomed to waiting rooms and long corridors. He was perhaps 45, Egyptian by appearance, with careful dark eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried a leather satchel that he placed on the seat beside him, rather than in the overhead rack, a small but telling choice. Whatever was in that bag, he wanted it close. He nodded politely at Poirot. Poirot nodded back. Sister Agatha was last to pass, a nun in full grey habit, her face pale and arranged into an expression of such deliberate peace that Poirot, who had great respect for genuine tranquility, recognized immediately that this was not it. This was the performance of peace. Her rosary moved through her fingers without rhythm, too fast, then too slow, the way breath moves in someone trying not to cry. She did not look at Poirot at all. Victor Szabo, the conductor, came to check tickets with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He was perhaps 50, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had once been open and was now, carefully, deliberately, closed. When he stamped Poirot's ticket and handed it back, their eyes met for just a moment, and Poirot saw something flicker there. Not guilt, not quite. More like the particular discomfort of a man who knows a thing he wishes he did not know. The whistle blew, the train shuddered, sighed, and began to move. Budapest fell away behind them, the lights, the bridges, the great dark ribbon of the Danube. The Hungarian plain opened up ahead, flat and vast, and darkening quickly under the October sky. Poirot looked out at it and thought about a woman with coin-threaded hair and serious eyes, the one who will die. He is the one who wished it. He poured himself a small glass of water from the carafe on the fold-out table, took a precise sip, and settled in to wait. In his experience, the truth never hurried. But on nights like this, cold, dark, the world reduced to a moving rectangle of light cutting through the Hungarian countryside, it tended to arrive before morning, the dead man's smile. It was 23 minutes past 2 in the morning when Victor Szabo knocked on Poirot's compartment door. Poirot was not asleep. He had been lying in the narrow bunk with his eyes open, listening to the train, the rhythm of the wheels on the track, the occasional groan of the old carriage adjusting itself against the cold, the wind pressing flat against the windows as they moved deeper into the Hungarian plain. He had been thinking, in the loose and patient way he sometimes thought, before something crystallized, about the passengers he had observed, about hands that were too still, about eyes that flickered, about a leather satchel that could not be allowed out of reach. The knock came again, 3 times, quiet but urgent. Poirot rose, put on his dressing gown with unhurried precision, and opened the door. Victor stood in the corridor, and the sight of him was enough. The conductor's face, which had been carefully closed all evening, was now simply undone, the way a locked room looks when something has forced the door from the inside. His color was wrong. His hands, at his sides, would not stay still. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, and his voice was very low. "There is a problem." Poirot said nothing. He simply waited, which was often more effective than asking. "Lord Ashworth," Victor continued. "He is... I cannot wake him." The compartment was 3 doors down. Poirot moved through the corridor in his dressing gown and slippers, unhurried but completely alert, the particular state he entered in these moments, where everything became very quiet inside him and very sharp outside. Victor unlocked the door with a key from his belt and stepped back without being asked, which told Poirot something about the conductor's state of mind. The compartment was in order. That was the first thing Poirot noticed. Not disturbed, in order. The small fold-out table had a glass of brandy on it, half finished. The traveling coat was folded across the foot of the bunk, with the careful neatness of a man who valued appearances even in private. The shoes were placed side by side beneath the seat, toes aligned. Everything spoke of a man who had prepared for sleep with deliberate, almost ceremonial, tidiness. Lord Edmund Ashworth lay on his back in the bunk, fully dressed save for his jacket. His arms were at his sides. His face was, and this was the thing that Poirot stood looking at for a long moment, entirely, profoundly at peace. Not the slack peace of natural sleep, something deeper than that, something that did not move when Poirot pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of his neck and found nothing there. Lord Ashworth was dead. Poirot straightened slowly. He looked at the face again, the jaw unclenched, the lines of habitual irritation smoothed entirely away, and thought that he had never seen this man look so unburdened as he did now, in death. That troubled him. It troubled him quite specifically. He examined the body with care and without touching more than necessary. There were no marks of violence, no bruising, no struggle, no sign that anything had been anything other than chosen. But at the left side of the chest, almost at the armpit, barely visible against the dark fabric of the shirt, a tiny mark, a puncture, no wider than a pin. The skin around it had not bruised, had not swelled. It was simply there, precise and deliberate, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. Poirot looked at it for a long time. Then he turned to Victor, who had remained in the doorway with the expression of a man trying very hard to appear less guilty than he felt. "How long ago did you find him?" 10 minutes, perhaps 12. "And before tonight, did Lord Ashworth speak to you? Ask you anything? Ask you to do anything?" The pause that followed was 1 second too long. "No, monsieur," Victor said. Poirot looked at him with the calm, patient attention of a man who has just written something down in his mind and will return to it later. "Very well," he said quietly. "You will please wake no one else on this train tonight. You will lock this compartment, and you will not open it until I ask you to. The train will not stop before its scheduled station. Is that understood?" Victor nodded. Something in his face shifted. Not quite relief, but the expression of a man who has just handed a weight to someone strong enough to carry it. Poirot took one last look at Lord Ashworth's peacefully empty face. The one who wished to die. He turned and walked back to his compartment. He did not sleep for the rest of the night. Lies wear many faces. Morning came slowly on the Danube Arrow. The Hungarian plain was grey and still outside the windows, occasional farmhouses passing like afterthoughts in the fog. The dining car smelled of burnt coffee and bread, and the small cluster of passengers who gathered there at 7:30 wore the particular expressions of people who did not yet know that something had changed overnight, that the world of this train was now divided, cleanly and permanently, into before and after. Poirot sat at the corner table and watched them arrive. Celeste Moreau came first. She was dressed carefully, hair arranged, face composed, but her eyes moved to Lord Ashworth's empty seat with an immediacy that told Poirot she had already noticed his absence before entering the carriage. She sat down, ordered coffee, and wrapped both hands around the cup, as though it were the only warm thing available. She did not ask where he was. That silence was, to Poirot, louder than any question. Dr. Nasser arrived next, satchel over his shoulder as always, and took a seat near the window. He ordered tea, unfolded a journal of botanical research, and began to read with the focused attention of a man who is working very hard at appearing undisturbed. His eyes moved across the page at a steady pace. Too steady. The same pace in the loud sections and the quiet ones. He was not reading. He was performing reading. Sister Agatha came last, rosary already moving through her fingers, and sat apart from the others with a cup of black tea she did not drink. Her eyes were red at the rims. She had been crying, recently and privately, and with the disciplined restraint of someone long practiced at crying without being caught. Poirot sipped his tisane and said nothing for a moment. Then he set down the cup, folded his hands on the table, and spoke to all three of them at once, in the pleasant, conversational tone of a man simply making an observation. Lord Ashworth died last night. The dining car went very quiet. Celeste's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She did not gasp. She did not look up immediately. When she did raise her eyes, they were wet. But beneath the wetness was something else, something complicated, something that in another context might almost have been relief. She caught herself. She looked away. Dr. Nasser closed his journal with great care and precision. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them with a small cloth, replaced them. All of this took perhaps 15 seconds, and Poirot watched every second of it with interest. A man who needs 15 seconds to compose his face before responding has a great deal to compose. "I am sorry to hear that," Dr. Nasser said. His voice was steady, professionally steady, the steadiness of a man trained to deliver and receive difficult news without fracture. "What was the cause?" "That," Poirot said pleasantly, "is what I am in the process of determining." Sister Agatha said nothing at all. She simply looked at her untouched tea, and her rosary went still in her hands, completely still, for the first time since Poirot had observed her. That stillness interested him enormously. He spoke to each of them separately, afterwards, in the corridor beside the dining car, while the fog outside moved slowly past the windows. Celeste told him that she and Lord Ashworth had argued the previous evening, about what she would not say. Her voice was careful, and her answers were short. She was not lying, Poirot felt, but she was selecting, choosing which truths to offer and which to keep folded away. Dr. Nasser told him his satchel contained plant specimens and research materials, nothing more. He met Poirot's eyes when he said it. That, Poirot noted, was the particular technique of experienced liars. They had learned that looking away was the tell, and so they had trained themselves not to. Sister Agatha told him only that she had slept poorly and had heard nothing in the night. But as she turned to go, Poirot said gently, "It is a difficult thing, madame, to grieve for someone the world does not know. You had reason to grieve." She stopped walking. She did not turn around. After a moment, she continued down the corridor, her habit whispering against the floor, her rosary hanging silent and still from her hand. Poirot watched her go. 3 people, he thought, 3 different kinds of silence, and each one is hiding something different. He turned back toward the window and the grey Hungarian morning. The train moved on. The Needle and the Night. Poirot returned to Lord Ashworth's compartment at 9:30. Victor unlocked the door without a word and stood aside. The compartment was exactly as Poirot had left it, undisturbed, ordered, the half-finished glass of brandy still on the fold-out table. In daylight, with the fog-filtered grey of the Hungarian morning pressing through the window, it looked less like a crime scene and more like a still life, a painting of a life interrupted, except that the interruption, Poirot was becoming increasingly certain, had been entirely deliberate. He began at the beginning, which was always the right place. The brandy glass first. He lifted it carefully, held it to the light. 1 set of fingerprints, Lord Ashworth's own, almost certainly, from the positioning. No residue visible at the bottom, no unusual film along the inside of the glass. But that told him relatively little. The most careful poisons leave nothing to see. The travelling coat next, folded at the foot of the bunk with that ceremonial neatness. Poirot went through the pockets with methodical patience. A pocket watch, stopped. He noted the time, 2:14, and filed it away. A folded letter, which he opened and read twice, his expression unchanged. A small amber pill bottle, empty, the label worn to illegibility, and in the innermost breast pocket, a single sheet of cream writing paper, folded in thirds, with nothing written on it at all. Poirot held the blank page for a long moment. A blank page carried deliberately in a breast pocket, close to the heart, was not nothing. It was a choice. A man does not fold a blank page and carry it next to his chest by accident. He set it aside and turned to the puncture mark. In the morning light, it was even more precise than it had appeared at 2 in the morning. A single entry point, clean-edged, made by something very fine and very sharp. Not a standard medical needle. The angle of entry suggested it had been administered by someone sitting beside the body, or, and here Poirot paused, and the thought settled into him with the particular weight of things that are true, self-administered. He sat on the edge of the bunk opposite and looked at the dead man's face. In daylight, Lord Ashworth looked smaller than he had seemed alive. Death had a habit of doing that, returning people to their original dimensions, stripping away the performance of personality. The arrogance was gone. The physical authority was gone. What remained was simply a man, somewhere in his middle 50s, with deep lines around the eyes, and a mouth that had, perhaps, forgotten how to be at rest until now. A man who wished to die. Poirot thought about Dr. Nasser's satchel. He thought about rare botanical extracts, South American in origin, he suspected, from certain details of the doctor's research journal he had observed at breakfast. Plants that could stop the heart cleanly, without violence, without pain. Plants that left no trace in the blood, that a basic examination would find. The kind of knowledge that existed in very specific corners of the medical world, and that a man like Lord Ashworth, wealthy, connected, determined, might have spent considerable effort locating. And then he thought about something else. He thought about the letter in the coat pocket. He unfolded it again and read it once more. It was from a doctor, a Harley Street physician, dated 6 weeks prior. The language was professional and measured, the way medical language is when it is delivering the unmeasurable. The words progressive, inoperable, and 3 to 4 months appeared in the second paragraph. The final line read, "I would strongly advise you to begin making arrangements, Lord Ashworth, at your earliest convenience." Poirot refolded the letter with great care and held it in both hands. So, there it was. Not murder, or not murder in any ordinary sense. A dying man, facing an ending he had not chosen, deciding instead to choose one. Deciding, and this was the part that Poirot turned over and over, to choose it here, on this specific train, among these specific people. That was not coincidence. Poirot did not believe in coincidence. He believed in arrangement. He believed in the careful, deliberate architecture of human decisions, the way one thing is chosen because of another thing, the way people construct the circumstances of their most private moments with more intention than they ever apply to their public ones. Lord Ashworth had chosen this train. He had chosen these people to be on it with him. The question, the real question, the one that made Poirot sit very still in that small compartment with the grey light on his face, was why. He stood, straightened his dressing gown, and looked one last time at Edmund Ashworth. "You arranged all of this, mon ami," he said quietly, to the dead man, "and I intend to understand exactly what you arranged, and for whom." He picked up the blank page, folded it, and placed it in his own pocket. Then he went to find Dr. Nasser. What the conductor knew. Dr. Nasser was not in his compartment. Poirot found him instead at the far end of the train, in the small observation alcove at the rear of the last carriage, a narrow space with a curved window that looked out over the receding track, the rails disappearing into the fog behind them, like a thought that could not be taken back. The doctor was standing with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the landscape, and he did not turn when Poirot entered, which meant he had heard the footsteps and chosen not to turn, which meant he had been expecting this conversation and had been deciding, in the moments before it began, exactly how much of himself to offer. Poirot stood beside him and looked out at the fog for a moment without speaking. It was a technique he had used for many years. Silence, offered generously, at the right moment, had a way of filling itself. People who were carrying something heavy found it very difficult to stand beside genuine quiet without eventually setting the weight down. It took Dr. Nasser approximately 40 seconds. He came to me in Vienna, the doctor said. His voice was low, directed at the window rather than at Poirot. 3 months ago, he had the letter from his physician already. He had done his research. He knew about my work, specifically about my work with Curare toxicophora and its cardiac applications. He was very thorough. Lord Ashworth was always very thorough. He asked you for the extract, Poirot said. He did not ask. A pause. He informed me that he would be requiring it. He had certain information about a period in my past, work I conducted in Cairo, research that was not entirely within the boundaries of what the medical establishment would have sanctioned. He was very calm about it, very pleasant even. That was the most unpleasant thing about it. The pleasantness. Poirot nodded slowly. He blackmailed you. He gave me a choice, Dr. Nasser said, with the precise bitterness of a man who understands that a choice with only one viable option is not a choice at all. The extract, or exposure. My career, my reputation, my ability to continue the work I have spent 20 years building. He finally turned from the window and looked at Poirot directly. Behind the spectacles, his eyes were tired in the deep way that has nothing to do with sleep. I told myself it was mercy, that what he was asking for was not murder but assistance, that there is a difference. And do you still tell yourself that? The doctor looked at him for a long moment. Less easily than I did yesterday, he said. Poirot found Victor Szabo in the luggage car at the rear of the train, conducting a needless inventory of bags that had not moved since Budapest. The conductor looked up when Poirot entered, and the expression on his face was that of a man who has been waiting for a reckoning and is almost grateful it has finally arrived. You locked a compartment, Poirot said, without preamble. The night before last, before we boarded in Budapest. Compartment 6. You locked it from the outside and told the assigned passenger it was unavailable due to a mechanical fault. Who asked you to do this? Victor set down his clipboard. He looked at it for a moment, then at Poirot. Lord Ashworth, he said. He contacted me 2 weeks before the journey. He said he needed compartment 6 to remain empty for the first night. He paid me, very generously. I told myself it was an eccentric request, nothing more. Rich men make eccentric requests. And compartment 6, Poirot said, is directly adjacent to Sister Agatha's compartment. Victor said nothing. You know who she is, Poirot said. It was not a question. The conductor picked up his clipboard again, turned it over in his hands, set it back down. A man postponing the moment of saying a true thing out loud. I have worked this line for 11 years, Monsieur Poirot. I have seen her board this train before, not as a nun, different clothes, different hair, but the face. He shook his head. You do not forget a face like that. Not when you have seen the kind of grief it carried the first time. When was the first time? 7 years ago. She boarded at the same station. She was looking for someone, asking questions of all the staff, showing a photograph. A man. I recognized the man in the photograph as a passenger. Victor paused. Lord Ashworth. Poirot was very still. She did not find him that journey. Victor continued. He had booked under a different name. I told her I did not know the passenger she was seeking. He stopped, swallowed. Lord Ashworth had also paid me, that journey, to say exactly that. The fog outside pressed against the small porthole window of the luggage car. The train swayed gently on the old tracks. So he knew she was here, Poirot said, almost to himself. He arranged for her to board this specific train. He ensured she was close, 1 compartment away. And then he ensured the compartment between them was empty, quiet, so that she would hear nothing in the night. Victor stared at him. He wanted her to be here. Why? Poirot looked at the fog outside the window for a long moment. Because, he said quietly, some men, at the very end, cannot bear to be entirely alone. Even men who have spent a lifetime ensuring that everyone who loved them had good reason to hate them. He turned and walked back through the swaying carriage toward the front of the train. Behind him, Victor Szabo stood in the luggage car and did not move for a very long time. A wife who died twice. Poirot knocked on Sister Agatha's compartment door at 11 o'clock precisely. There was a long pause before she answered, long enough that Poirot imagined her on the other side of the door, rosary in hand, making a final decision about which version of herself to present. When the door opened, she was composed. Entirely, exhaustingly composed, in the way that only people who have practiced composure under genuine pressure can manage. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, not surprised, not pretending to be surprised. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. The compartment was spare. She had added nothing personal to it. No book, no bag left open, no small human traces of occupancy. It was the compartment of someone passing through, someone who had not allowed themselves to settle, even for a night. Poirot sat across from her and folded his hands in his lap. "Your name," he said gently, "is not Sister Agatha." She looked at him with steady grey eyes. "No," she said, "it is not. Your name is Margaret Ashworth. You were married to Lord Edmund Ashworth in 1921. The world was informed of your death in 1924. A boating accident on Lake Geneva. There was a funeral. There was a grave." He paused. "And yet here you are. Margaret Ashworth, because that was who she was." And Poirot found that he could not continue thinking of her as anyone else. Looked down at the rosary in her hands. She turned it once, slowly, then let it go still. "He arranged the death," she said. "Edmund was very good at arranging things." There was no bitterness in her voice. Something beyond bitterness. A tiredness so complete, it had become almost peaceful. "I had discovered something about him. A financial arrangement that was not legal. And beyond that, a child. A girl. Born to a Romani woman he had been involved with before our marriage, and had continued to be involved with after it. He had hidden the child, hidden the woman, hidden everything. When I confronted him, he told me that I had two options: disappear quietly, with enough money to live on, or be destroyed publicly in ways he was very specific about. And you chose to disappear. I chose to survive," she said, with a precision that corrected him gently. "There is a difference." Poirot looked at her for a moment. "You became a nun. Eventually, not immediately. For 2 years I was simply a woman, living under a different name in a village in Slovenia, waiting to feel like a person again." She paused. "The convent gave me structure, routine, a reason to be useful without being known. I found I did not mind it. And yet you are here, on this train, in this habit." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "Not in Slovenia." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Outside, the fog had begun to thin, and the first pale suggestion of the Hungarian countryside was emerging. Flat fields, bare trees, a farmhouse in the distance with smoke rising straight up into the cold, still air. "I received a letter," she said finally. "Unsigned, posted from Vienna 6 weeks ago. It contained only a train ticket and a date. No explanation, no name." She looked at Poirot. "But I knew, after 20 years, I knew his handwriting. Even in a typed address, the envelope, he always folded his envelopes in a particular way, the left corner first. A small thing, a private thing." Her voice caught, very slightly, and she steadied it. "He was telling me where he would be, and when." Poirot thought about the blank page in his pocket, the sheet of cream writing paper, folded in thirds, carried next to a dying man's heart. A letter, with nothing written on it. A letter that said everything by saying nothing. "I cannot find the words, but I wanted you to know I thought of you at the end." "Did you go to him?" Poirot asked. "In the night?" She shook her head. "I stood outside his compartment door for a very long time. I had my hand raised to knock." She looked down at that hand now, as though it still remembered the position. "And then I heard nothing, only the train, and I knew I was too late, or that I had made myself too late, which is perhaps the same thing." Her voice did not break, but her hand, the one that had not knocked, closed slowly into a fist in her lap. Poirot did not look away from her. He thought that in all his years, in all his cases, he had rarely sat across from a grief quite so old and quite so unresolved as this one. A grief that had been folded and refolded for 20 years, carried in a breast pocket close to the heart, never sent. "He wanted you here," Poirot said quietly, "not to witness, not to be punished. I believe he wanted someone present who had known him before he became what he became." Margaret Ashworth looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up her rosary and held it, not moving it, simply holding it, the way one holds a hand. "That," she said softly, "is the saddest thing I have ever heard." Poirot had nothing to add to that, so he said nothing at all. The little grey cells speak. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Poirot asked Victor to gather everyone in the dining car. He did not phrase it as a request. He rarely did in these moments. There was a particular quality to Poirot's voice when a case had reached its point of resolution, a quietness, a settled certainty, that made people move without quite knowing why. Victor went without question. Within 20 minutes, they were all there. Celeste Moreau sat with her hands flat on the table, her coffee untouched. Dr. Nasser had, for the first time, placed his satchel on the overhead rack rather than beside him. Margaret Ashworth, still in her habit, still holding her rosary, sat at the end of the table, slightly apart, as she had always been slightly apart. Victor stood near the door, neither seated nor quite standing at attention, a man uncertain of his own position in the proceedings. Poirot stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence do its preliminary work. Outside the windows, the fog had cleared entirely. The Hungarian countryside moved past them in long, golden strips, October fields, copper-leaved trees, the occasional glitter of water in a low ditch. It was, Poirot noted with some private irony, exactly as beautiful as Hastings had promised. He began. "I will tell you," Poirot said, "not what I suspect, but what I know. The little grey cells, they do not deal in suspicion, they deal in fact, and in the logical arrangement of fact, and in the understanding that human beings, whatever they believe about themselves, are remarkably consistent in their inconsistencies." He placed both hands flat on the table, a mirror of Celeste's posture. Lord Edmund Ashworth did not die by another's hand. He died by his own, with assistance that was not given freely, but given nonetheless. He was a man of terminal illness, of considerable pride, and of a lifelong habit of arranging the world to his precise specifications. He did not wish to die in a bed, diminished, attended by nurses. He wished to die on his own terms. He arranged to do so. Dr. Nasser did not move. He blackmailed Dr. Nasser for the means. He booked this specific train because it was small and slow and would not reach its next station until morning, giving him the night. He ensured that the compartment between his own and Madame Margaret's was empty, so that she would not be disturbed, so that she could be present without being witness. He paused. He wrote her a letter with nothing in it, because he had never, in his life, known how to say the true thing directly. But he folded it and carried it. That was the closest he could come. Margaret did not look up. He invited Celeste Moreau on this journey because he had wronged her profoundly, forcing a marriage through blackmail of her own, trapping her in a life she had not chosen. He wished her to be present at his end, not as punishment, but because in his way, his cold, controlling, deeply damaged way, he considered it a form of release. Her presence at his death was, in his mind, the only apology he knew how to make. Celeste's jaw tightened, a single muscle in her cheek, nothing more. But her eyes, when they finally rose to meet Poirot's, were not the eyes of a grieving widow. They were the eyes of a woman taking her first full breath in a very long time. And Victor, Poirot continued, turning to the conductor, was simply a man who had been bought twice by the same person, and who carried the guilt of both transactions in a face that had forgotten how to be open. Victor said nothing. He nodded, very slightly, and looked at the floor. Poirot straightened. There is no murderer on this train. There is a dead man, and there are people he wronged, and there is a choice he made in the final chapter of his life that was, whatever else one might say about it, entirely his own. He looked around the table. The law will ask its questions when we arrive. I will answer them honestly and completely. What each of you chooses to say is your own matter. I am not here to construct a story. I am here only to understand one. Silence held the dining car for a long moment. Then Celeste spoke, very quietly. The woman on the platform, in Budapest. Who was she? Poirot had been waiting for this. That, he said, is the question that has been sitting behind all the others since the beginning. The woman who knew, the woman who warned me, the woman who boarded no train, and yet seemed to know the destination better than any of us. He reached into his pocket and placed the blank letter on the table. She was the child, he said, the daughter he hid, the one thing in his life he had arranged to disappear and had never been able to stop thinking about. She had found him, or perhaps he had, in the end, allowed himself to be found. She came to the platform not to stop him. She came, I believe, simply to see him one last time. The table was very quiet. She could not make herself stop him, Poirot said, and she could not make herself stay. So she did the only thing left. She warned a stranger. She put the weight of knowing into other hands, because she could no longer carry it alone. He looked at the blank page on the table. A father who could not write the true thing. A daughter who could not say it directly. Two people who communicated entirely in the language of almost. He paused. It is not so uncommon, I think. It is, in fact, one of the most common tragedies there is. No one spoke. The train moved through the golden afternoon, and the wheels on the old track kept their steady, patient rhythm, and outside the windows, Hungary continued to be exactly as beautiful and exactly as indifferent as the world always is when something human and irreversible has just occurred inside it. The gypsy's secret. The train reached the Austrian border station at 4:30. It arrived, as old trains do, without drama, a gradual slowing, a long sigh of brakes, the platform emerging from the late afternoon light, like something that had been waiting patiently and was too dignified to show relief. There were border officials, and there were questions, and there was the formal, procedural business of a man having died aboard a train in a foreign country. Poirot answered everything asked of him with precision and economy. He said what was true. He omitted nothing material. He volunteered nothing that would place additional weight on people who were already carrying enough. The officials were efficient. By 6 o'clock they were satisfied. Lord Ashworth's body was removed from the train at the border station, wrapped in the same careful, ceremonial tidiness in which he had arranged himself for death. A telegram was dispatched to London. The machinery of official consequence began its slow, indifferent turning. Poirot watched from the platform, his coat buttoned against the October cold, his breath making small clouds in the still air. Celeste Moreau left the train at the border station. She did not take the connecting service to London. She stood on the platform with one small bag, and the particular posture of a woman who has just realized she is, for the first time in several years, entirely free to stand wherever she chooses. She did not look liberated. Liberation rarely looks the way people imagine it will. She looked tired and uncertain, and quietly, tentatively alive, in a way she had not looked when she boarded in Budapest. She found Poirot on the platform before she left. "He told me," she said, without preamble. "2 nights before we boarded, he told me everything. The illness, the plan, what he intended to do." She looked at Poirot steadily. "He told me because he wanted me to know that he knew what he had done to me." That was the word he used. Knew. Not sorry, not forgive me, simply that he knew. She paused. I think for Edmund Ashworth, that was as close to an apology as the architecture of the man permitted. Poirot looked at her carefully. And was it enough? Celeste considered this for a genuine moment. Not a polite moment, but a real one. The kind where the answer is actually being located rather than constructed. "No," she said, "but it was something. And something, after nothing for 4 years, is something." She picked up her bag. "Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Bon courage, madame," he said quietly. He watched her walk down the platform until the crowd absorbed her, and then she was gone, a woman stepping back into her own life, through a door that had just been, at considerable cost to everyone involved, unlocked. It was Victor who told him about Madame Zara. They were standing together at the far end of the platform, in the last of the afternoon light, and Victor had the look of a man unburdening himself of the final item in a very heavy load. "She came to me a month ago," he said, "before the journey was arranged, before any of it. She found me at the station in Budapest. She knew my name, knew my route, knew that I worked this line. She told me her father would be on my train. She told me she needed to know he would not be alone at the end." He stopped. She did not ask me to stop him. She understood, I think, that it was beyond stopping. She only asked me, if something happened, to make sure someone was told, someone who would understand. Poirot was very still. "She asked you to ensure I was on the train." Victor nodded. "She knew of you. She had researched carefully. She said you were a man who understood things that went beyond guilt and innocence. She said," he paused, remembering, "she said, you were a man who understood why." Poirot said nothing for a long moment. He thought about a woman on a platform, taking a stranger's hand, with the certainty of someone delivering a message they have carried for a very long time. He thought about dark eyes that held grief without performance. He thought about a daughter who could not save her father, and could not be saved by him, and could not walk away entirely, and so had done the only remaining thing, which was to ensure that someone bore witness, that the story was understood by at least one person who had no stake in its telling. "Where is she now?" Poirot asked. Victor shook his head. "I don't know. She came once, she said what she needed to say, and she left. I have not seen her since." Poirot nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and took out the blank letter, the cream page, folded in thirds, carried next to a dead man's heart. He looked at it for a moment, then he refolded it, carefully, left corner first, the way Edmund Ashworth had always folded his envelopes. He placed it back in his pocket. That evening, aboard the connecting service to Vienna, Poirot sat alone in his compartment and opened his small leather diary. He wrote for a while, not the facts of the case. Those were already arranged with perfect clarity in the filing system of his mind, accessible whenever required. He wrote instead about the other things, the things that did not fit into reports. He wrote about a man who had spent his life controlling everything and everyone around him, and who had in the end exercised the only control he had left over the manner of his own departure. Whether that was courage or its opposite, Poirot found he could not decide. He suspected it was neither. He suspected it was simply human, in the complicated, unglamorous way that most truly human things are. He wrote about Margaret Ashworth, who had died once on paper, and once in fact, and who had ridden a night train in a borrowed habit to stand outside a door she could not bring herself to knock on. He hoped, and Poirot was not, by nature, a man who hoped loosely, that she would find her way back to whatever life she had built in her Slovenian village, and that it would be enough, and that one day the rosary would move through her fingers, not as a discipline, but as a comfort. He wrote about Celeste, standing on a platform with one bag and the whole of her future still undecided. He thought she would be all right. He thought she was the kind of person who, once free, remembered quickly how to move. He wrote about Dr. Nasser, who had allowed himself to be blackmailed into mercy, and would spend a long time deciding how to feel about that. He wrote about Victor, who had been bought twice, and had finally, on a cold platform in the late afternoon, paid his own debt in the only currency available, the truth. And then he wrote about Madame Zara. He wrote, "She gave the weight of knowing to a stranger, because she could no longer carry it alone. This is not weakness. This is, I think, one of the bravest things a person can do, to admit that a thing is too heavy, and to trust that someone else will not drop it." He paused. Outside the window, Austria was dark and cold and star-scattered. He wrote, "I did not drop it." Then he closed the diary, capped his pen, and looked out at the darkness moving past the glass. Somewhere out there, in Budapest or on some other road entirely, in the layered skirts and coin-threaded hair of a woman who had learned to carry impossible things, Madame Zara was living her life. Whether she had found peace in what she had done, or whether she was still carrying the part that could not be handed to anyone else, Poirot did not know. He thought about her often, afterward. He never found her. Some endings, Hercule Poirot had come to understand, are not conclusions. They are simply the place where the story stops being told, while somewhere beyond the last page, the people in it continue, imperfectly and quietly and without resolution, to live. That was not a comfortable thought, but it was, he had found, an honest one, and in the end, honesty was the only thing he had ever truly been able to offer. The Danube Arrow completed her run at 6:42 the following morning, arriving at her final station 11 minutes behind schedule. She was retired from service the following spring, too old, the railway company said, for the modern demands of the line. Her carriages were sold for parts. Her name was removed from the timetables. Nobody wrote about her, but she had carried, on one October night, more human truth than most vessels are ever asked to hold. That seemed, to at least one small Belgian, with very precise moustaches, like enough.